Hey everybody, Mr. Duker back again and looking at the origins of World War II, super simplified. So World War II is complicated. It's the biggest, largest war in human history to date, knock on wood. And the reasons for it are complicated. Today I just kind of want to set the table, set the stage for the war, kind of the basic reasons why it began, and then focus on the major participants, the bigger countries that fought in the war, kind of where they're at on the eve of the conflict, some of the reasons why they are engaged and behaving the way they are. Not really getting into events yet, just kind of a who's who and why World War II kind of even began in the first place, right? Not too complicated. But if you're going to talk about World War II, you got to go back to World War I. Many historians actually say it's the two wars are actually one giant war, and there's just like a 20-year pause in between. But they're very much connected. So if you remember, at the end of World War I, Germany loses and gets the blame for a lot of what happened in the war, even though they didn't really start it. According to the Allies, you break it, you buy it. And so Germany was severely punished with the Treaty of Versailles, a peace treaty designed to limit Germany's power and make it so weak it could never, ever start another war again. So to do this, Germany was basically given the bill for World War I. That's called reparations. Here's all the billions of dollars the war cost, and good luck paying this back. Again, we're going to make them so broke they could never cause any problems again. Payments as punishment, you could say. And there were severe limits placed on the German military. They couldn't have an air force. They couldn't have submarines anymore. I think the German military was reduced to like 200,000 soldiers, which is barely enough to like defend Germany if it was attacked. Basically neutering Germany and just making them, again, so weak they could never cause conflict. Problem is, Germany, this was like a slap in the face. They were very angry and upset, salty, you would say. They fought just as hard as everybody else in the war. They made sacrifices as well. And now the Allies are punishing them. Germany is very upset and will not forget how they're treated at the end of Versailles. But the seeds of World War II are planted at the end of World War I. And really, it's the Treaty of Versailles that kind of gets this idea, Germany wants to even the score. They kind of want some revenge. They want some payback because of how horribly they were treated. Then, of course, about 10 years later, you have the Great Depression. So 1929, stock market crashes, and that whole decade of the 1930s, not just the United States, but all around the world, countries were thrown into the Great Depression, the worst economic downturn the world has ever seen. And of course, it affected the United States tremendously, but do not forget it affected these other nations as well. And they all are suffering from this. They all have high unemployment. They all have huge deficits, homelessness, hunger, no jobs. It's not good, and they suffered probably more than the United States does, because they just had, especially in Europe, right? They just had a huge world war fought there just 10 years ago with a ton of deaths. The military's in ruins. These countries are recovering from the war, and now the Great Depression is thrown on top of them, and they don't handle it well. Germany, especially with the Treaty of Versailles and then the Great Depression, is crushed by what happens here. And so what you start to see is people get desperate. And in desperate times, people will take desperate measures. And so these European countries and others start looking to strong men to lead them out of this, right? I need to eat. I want food. I want a job. I want home. And so you get these dictators who come to power and promise the people, basic things, giving them the things that they desperately want, but kind of doing it maybe in nefarious ways, taking advantage of the depression to increase their power. And they increase their power by taking aggressive action against their neighbors, to take their resources, to take their lands, to take their wealth. That's kind of the big reason why the war ends up happening, World War II, It's these Germany, Italy, Russia, Japan kind of aggressively attacking their neighbors to try and gain their resources, right? And then also aggressively attacking their own people who kind of got in the way, weren't needed, kind of were roadblocks or speed bumps, kind of, they're not doing good things, is what we'll say, right? So let's look at these different countries in the war and just kind of see who's in charge, where they're kind of at, where their mindset is on the eve of World War II, and just kind of see again why this war is happening in the first place. There's a lot of countries involved. So the first one is Italy. Italy is going to be a member of the Axis alliance, led by a guy named Benito Mussolini. They called him El Duce. We always called him El Dunce. Anyway, he's leader of the fascist party in Italy. Now, you probably hear that a lot, fascism, and you're a fascist. And what does fascism really mean? I think today we might overuse the word a little bit. A fascist is basically someone who believes the nation is more important than the people, right? So the country comes first. The country's rights, the country's wealth, the country's health is first, and then the people come second. Or I guess you could say the needs of the one outweigh the needs of the many, maybe I guess you could say. So that's what fascism believes. And when you put the country first, you can do a lot to make the country stronger, even if that means stepping on some of the rights, properties, and lives of people in your nation. What's more important? The country is strong, or that your rights are taken care of, I guess you could say. So anyway, that's what kind of fascism basically is. Excuse me. And by limiting the rights of people in Italy, Mussolini was able to kind of make Italy recover in the depression a little bit, to increase jobs and wealth a little. Italy's not super strong, but Mussolini's trying to do that. And so one way he would show off Italy's power and expand is he decided to pick on some of his neighbors in Africa. And even before World War II began, Italy had a number of small wars in Africa, like against Ethiopia and other small African kingdoms. He thought it would be easy pickings to get some land, to get some extra resources, and make Italy stronger by picking on these African nations. They don't go very well. Italy struggles even against these Ethiopia and fighting these wars. Italy is kind of showboaty, right? They like to bump their chest and talk about how powerful they are, but really Italy is pretty weak, pretty low in resource poor, and they just aren't as strong as they'd like to think they are. But anyway, they're a bully, definitely a bully, picking on the weaker neighbors to try and make themselves look tougher than they are. Next, of course, got to talk about Germany. So we talked about how the Treaty of Versailles really hurt Germany and its people, and the resentment, and Hitler is playing off of that resentment. That's how he comes to power. We like to forget Hitler was elected. He was elected by the Germans to become Chancellor of Germany, and they actually chose to put this guy in charge because what he was selling is what they liked. He wanted to get revenge. He wanted to throw off the Treaty of Versailles to make Germany strong again, to restore German honor, put people back to work, and promise to make Germany strong and kind of reclaim its rightful place in Europe, I guess. And to the Germans, this is music to their ears. Now, he's part of the Nazi Party. What is a Nazi? Again, people, maybe that word is used so often now it loses its meaning. Nazism is just fascism with racism added. So the nation comes first. The nation's rights are put above the people's rights. But when you have some racism added, you can see where this is going. You start to maybe pick on other people in your country. And one way Hitler was able to increase Germany's strength was by already picking on the Jews. So yes, he put people back to work, but he did that by kicking Jews out of the workforce. Yes, he made Germany wealthy. He did that by taking away German businesses and German land. And so by picking on, of course your unemployment numbers are going to look good when a whole part of your country isn't even allowed to work anymore, like with the Jews. And he made Germany strong by increasing Germany's military. which they weren't supposed to do according to the treaty, but he just ignores it. So we're going to put people back to work building tanks, building bombs, building guns, building an air force, which we weren't allowed to. But by military spending, he was able to kind of spend his way out of the Depression and put people to work building weapons on the backs of the Jews. Next would be the Soviet Union. The Russians were an ally in World War I, but they kind of tap out at the end of the war and have a civil war, which the communists will end up winning. Stalin is part of the Communist Party and rises to power in the Soviet Union in the days after World War I. So Stalin, what is communism? A lot of isms today. Communism is a type of government and economic system, I guess you could say, where the government owns all the means of production. So what that means is, under communism, the government owns all the farms. It owns all the factories. It owns all the resources. It even owns your labor as a worker, and they kind of tell everybody what to do, what to make, how much, and all that stuff, and what designs. They control everything. But after this bloody war, Stalin is already a little paranoid, and he wants to try and condense his power. So he spends a lot of his time kicking out, arresting, purging the Soviet Union of any perceived enemies or threats to his power. He's trying to consolidate his strength, and he's doing this by, again, throwing, generals who maybe looked at him funny in jail, workers who maybe, again, supported a different side in the Civil War. He's actually killing a lot of his own people, throwing them in these work death camp prisons out in Siberia, and really weakening the Soviet Union. One reason they do so badly at the beginning of World War II is these purges really took all the best minds and capable people out of the Soviet Union, and so they kind of were left with people loyal to Stalin to fight the war, but maybe weren't the best at it. And Stalin also was kind of aggressive, attacking some of his neighbors in the early days of the war to increase his power and increase his resources as well. So he will be a friend, he will be part of the Allies in World War II, but not a nice guy, and very, very aggressive in treating his own people and his own neighbors. But hey, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? All right, Japan, also part of the Axis alliance, also an ally in World War I, but at the end of the war, they were treated pretty badly by the Allies. They were looked down on as kind of like a second-tier power, and Japan thought that after helping to win World War I, they would be rewarded, and the Allies would thank them by giving them a lot of land and respect and resources, and Japan basically kind of is feeling shafted. They are salty also, and so basically their attitude is, well, if the Allies won't recognize us as a growing equal power, screw them, we're just going to go and do our own thing. And so Japan is going to very aggressively, probably the most aggressive, go and attack its neighbors for their land and resources, because Japan is a small island chain, very poor when it comes to natural resources like oil and metals, and so they are dependent on other places to get things to run its economy, to build its weapons. That's a big part of why they don't like the United States, but that's getting ahead of myself. Anyway, so since 1931, they will be involved in all throughout World War II, a big war in China to try and take some of their land. Again, some historians will say World War II actually begins in 1931 when Japan invades China, and everyone else is just trying to play catch up ever since. Japan is controlled by the military. So the guy of all the fancy decorations is the emperor, who's the leader of Japan, kind of like a king, but he is kind of a figurehead. By this time, it's really the military that's taken control. And so that bald guy there is a guy named Hideki Tojo, and it's really the military kind of calling the shots, and the emperor is just kind of standing by and letting them lead Japan down this aggressive road. France and England. So after World War I, they are pretty devastated, France especially, because most of the war was fought on French soil. Economy wrecked, population is wrecked. A whole generation of men has been wiped out in these trenches. And so they're kind of shell-shocked, basically. Then the Depression happens, and that just makes things worse. But they're kind of terrified of another war happening, and that's why they wanted to punish Germany after World War I to make sure there would never be another war as big as World War I. Doesn't work. But that is their mindset. And so they're kind of retreating back into themselves and just kind of ignoring all these danger signs going on around the world. France is going to focus on defending itself by building a giant string of bases and fortifications called the Maginot Line. You can see a little illustration there. Very impressive, but when push comes to shove, it doesn't really do much to protect France. But hey, it looks nice, it sounds nice, very expensive. We're doing something to protect France. But that's what they're doing. They're trying to defend themselves, and England is going to be focusing on trying to control its vast empire. India, Australia, parts of Asia, Africa. England's pretty wealthy and powerful, but it takes a lot of time and energy to control all these colonies, and so that's what their focus is on kind of right now. Avoiding war, keeping what they have, and hanging on to it for kind of dear life. And last and not least is the United States. So, of course, the Great Depression, does not go well for the United States. And so throughout the whole 1930s, we're just focused on our own economic recovery, putting Americans back to work, thanks to FDR and his New Deal, trying anything we can to get America back and working again. And so we're kind of focusing also on ourselves. The United States adopts a policy of neutrality or isolationism. So as we see all these bad things going on in the rest of the world, not our problem, right? Not our worry. Hey, we already did our part in World War I. This does not involve us anymore. So we're just trying to stay out. If war does happen again, United States doesn't affect us. Partly because we can feel this way. We are protected by the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. So we are kind of removed from the world's issues. At least now, technology isn't going to make that the case when the war happens, but that's what we think. And so again, we're just kind of trying to stay out and is uninvolved from this war as long as we can. That won't work, but that's the idea, and that's what the United States is trying to do in the years leading up to World War II. Okay, whew. I know this channel is called Super Simplified, but there's a lot of stuff going on here. So hopefully that was helpful. Hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. And now that you know the major players of the war and kind of the reasons for the war, aggressive expansion by these Axis powers, and kind of kick the can down the road, not my problem, I'll deal with it later mindset from the Allies, you can see how war is kind of inevitable, and these two sides are they're going their own way, but they're going to cross paths here pretty soon, because eventually you just can't be attacking your neighbors, and the Allies just can't keep ignoring all these horrible things going on in the world. So that is all for today. Like I said, hopefully it was helpful, and I'll catch you later.